Good morning, good morning. Yes, I was up all night last night putting the finishing touches on my own Blaze guide. I'm going to talk about that here in a little bit, but what we're going to do today, after spending hours about talking about Blaze, is talk about Blaze. There are 3 archetypes that I recognize Blaze to fit into or to be able to bring to a skirmish season. So whether you plan to play Blaze or play against Blaze this skirmish season, you need to know about these 3. Let's go ahead and talk about those. I will show you a little bit about my list, and then if you want even more information about the way I've been playing Blaze for almost 400 games now, yeah, that's right, 400 games, check the link in the description. There's a link to a full, the biggest guide I've ever put out. So let's go ahead and get started. So first things first, let's talk about who Blaze is and what does she do. Blaze is a 4 intellect, 17 health wizard hero young that gets energy counters every time you opt a card. So if you look at a card through an opt effect, you get an energy counter. You can then, once per turn at instant speed, pay X amount of energy counters to banish a card that deals X arcane damage and then play that at instant speed. So essentially, you can do like Kano things in ways without manipulating the top of your deck. You don't have to play from the top of your deck. You're literally taking a card out of your hand, losing a card essentially to be able to play it at your opponent. So you need to have that card. You can't just find it off the top. And then you can play it with impunity. Essentially, you have Storm Striders every turn in a way, and that's pretty cool. So let's talk about the couple of ways that she's built. First of all, this is Erica's first place winning Battle Hardened Florence list, and this is perhaps the most popular way to play Blaze right now. This is, we'll go quickly through the equipment, Metacarpus Node, Spellfire Cloak, Storm Striders because duh, and Talismanic Lens because opting. These 2 make sense. You're really fast, and this is a way to get 1 extra value onto some spells, which sometimes just puts you over the top. This one gets you more counters on the board, which is great. You sometimes pop at turn 0, and Storm Striders because we are a wizard, and this is what wizards want to do, not that other stuff where you're like getting action points. Come on now, we're about a wizard life. Waning Moon is the key to understanding this version of the deck. This version of the deck seeks to play efficiently on your turn and then sometimes on your opponent's turn. You can throw a 1-for-4 arcane spell and follow up with this Waning Moon for 2 resources, making a total of pitching a blue to play an Aether Quickening or any other 1-for-4 and then follow it up with Waning Moon. So on your turn, this is 6 arcane damage. On your opponent's turn, it's 4 plus 3, so 7 arcane damage. So how are we going about that? How is this deck constructed to do that? Well, we have 2 Aether Quickening reds, we have 2 Eternal Inferno reds, we have 2 Photon Splicing reds, we have 2 Scalding Rain reds, and that kind of explains how this functions. You've got 8 different cards that allow you to play this 1-for-4 into the 2-for-2, essentially Waning Moon play on your turn, and then on your opponent's turn, you can do the same exact thing, a 1-for-4, using the 4 counters from Blaze, and that is expensive. 4 counters from Blaze is nothing to scoff at, but you can go 1-for-4 into Waning Moon for 3, for a total of 7 damage. So, if that's the main play line, then what do the rest of the cards do to support that? How do you get those counters? Well, Cindering Foresight is an incredible card. Cindering Foresight allows you to play it at instant speed on your opponent's turn and to opt 3, 2, or 1. And you can play a rainbow here so that you can get more counters. You're able to play these counters, pop these counters off to be able to play Aether Quickenings. But this is not the only way you get counters. You're also getting counters from a retinue, litany, if you will, of Whispering to the Oracle. So we have red Whisper of the Oracle, we have yellow, and we have blue Whisper of the Oracle. Again, this is a way to opt. Now, you can't play this on your opponent's turn. You have to play this on your turn, meaning that if you want to gain more counters, your turn will partially be taken up by playing a Whisper of the Oracle, which then means that you're not blocking with a card on your opponent's turn or sending a card on your opponent's turn. You're using that to play Whisper of the Oracle on your own turn, okay? So keep that in mind. If you're playing this version of the deck list, you do have to make some concessions on your opponent's turn to either block and keep a Whisper of the Oracle so that you can play it, or you're just playing into Cindering Foresight. Now, I have opinions on the deck builds overall. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is how this deck seeks to play out all of these 1-for-4s consistently on your turn and your opponent's turn by playing into these very heavy included versions of opting. Okay, the other versions of opt that we have in the deck are Eye of Ophidia, kind of expensive card, Gaze the Ages, which can opt. It can be a 1-card play. Scour in the main board. Scour is fantastic. Scour is an incredible card. By the way, you pay 0 for this to play it. Yeah, that's pretty good. And Will of Arcana. Sonic Boom is the last card we haven't talked about that is a key like staple piece because you're able to just Sonic Boom into something that you know is on the top of your deck because you opted it there, which is great. In the inventory, you see a lot of the same sort of things that people are running. 2 copies of Absorb and Aether. I love this card. I love this card so much. I think this card is perhaps the most underrated card in the deck. And Fate Foreseen because defensive, and Aetherize. This has a great play into like everybody right now. There's a ton of people that are playing instants. People might be playing the Arcane Polarity against you. They could be playing the Oasis Respite, of course, against you, which has less utility into Blaze than any other wizard ever before. But this is a fantastic card to include in general. And then Alluvian Constellus is great for the mirror. Some people play it into like Rune Blades, but it's great for the mirror. Okay, the card I haven't talked about is Emeritus Scolding. So after you've done this back and forth 1-for-4 plus 2 or 1-for-4 plus 3, you try to kill your opponent with Emeritus Scolding, which deals more damage on your opponent's turn than your own. So this is a 2-for-6 on your opponent's turn. Yes, the yellows are incredible. I describe this as perhaps the best card in the deck. It is a 2-for-5. And then the 2-for-4. This is, in my opinion, the other probably best card in the deck, which is hilarious. Emeritus Scolding yellow and blue. People are like, what? Why? No, these cards are like some of the best in the deck. They do so much more for you than any other yellow or blue in the deck. And this is how you finish off the game against your opponent. So this type of deck, again, is looking to play back and forth, play a little bit more consistently. You know the damage output on any given turn is most likely 6 or 7 until you go kind of crazy with Cinderace and Emeritus Scolding off the top. Now, what are the weaknesses to this style of deck? Well, take a look at how many cards do not deal arcane damage. Let's count that. 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Sometimes it does. But we'll count it for right now. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. That's about half the deck. And then, of course, if you include any of these cards down here, they don't deal arcane damage. So about half of the deck doesn't deal arcane damage, which means in this version of the deck, in this version where you're playing very consistently back and forth, you could be walking down the life totals, and you can get to a point where you are ready to kill your opponent and you draw into a hand of duds, especially 2-block duds like Cindering Foresight or no-block Eye of Ophidia, Will of Arcana, or 3 blocks, I guess, but they don't deal damage to your opponent, and you can't play them at instant speed because you can't even boots them out. That is a problem. That is a problem that you have to recognize, and you have to manipulate your deck to play around that problem. And you, as the player, can show some player skill by playing around that issue. Okay, so this is one way this deck can falter. The other way is this deck can be fatigued. It does have a cap. It doesn't really go up over the top of that cap. It is a little bit dicey. And I will say it has the capacity to do that. Fatigue is not like hugely prevalent, but it is prevalent enough right now in Blitz that you should worry about it. And the other cap is this. If you don't go fast enough into certain matchups, you can start to fall behind. If you consider it a traditional race matchup, you can sometimes fall behind depending on draws or depending on what your opponent does. Remember, in Blitz, it is a fairly explosive format. I would say it's the best format right now. It has the most availability to play just about any hero. All heroes can do something really good in Blitz right now. Some heroes can do those things really back to back. And so in those matchups, you almost have to just take the stance of I need to kill you first, and I need to do so really efficiently. And this deck sometimes holds you back from that. That being said, it won a freaking battle hardened, so I can't harp on it too much. It is pretty solid. Congratulations, Erica, for winning that battle hardened. This is one great archetype. It's the reason that this archetype is perhaps seeing the most play right now, but it's not the only archetype. So let's go ahead and look at the next one. In the same battle hardened, a mirror was played at the end of the tournament in the finals, and Alex came out second. But look at Alex's deck list. There's some similar through lines to this. Of course, we've got Aether Quickening, so the 1-for-4 package does have some representation. Scalding Rain is in there. Eternal Inferno is in there as well. So there's 6 of those 1-for-4s. But take a look at this. Less opt counters being generated overall. That's an important note. If you're learning Blaze, and again, I talk about this in the guide that I released. If you're learning Blaze, you need to know how many counters your deck generates and when and if you should be playing towards those, or of course, just trying to win the game. So less counters being played overall, and in the place of those counters, we have Blanche. We have Cut Through the Facade, which this card's so good right now. We have Erase Face and Wounded Bull. So this is an attack action version of Blaze. And I will tell you right now, oh, there's Photon Splicing as well. So you have all the heavy hitters, if you will, the 8 1-for-4s. So I will tell you, this version is the least played right now, and I think it should be more played. I think the more attack actions you include, the more you're punishing your opponent for not bringing, blocking equipment. Right now, and this is kind of crazy, right now there are so many heroes that have beneficial blocking equipment. They get something beneficial for themselves by blocking with their equipment. And in doing so, you are, by playing Blaze, of course, you are taking that away from them because they're subbing it out for their Arcane Barrier. And then you kind of like do the double reverse, the double bluff, and you play things like Blanche into the matchups that matter, or Cut Through the Facade into many of the matchups right now that matter, that care about auras, or Erase Face. Erasing someone's face in this meta is pretty solid. And of course, just playing a like above rate Wounded Bull because it's a 3-for-8 right now because you start at 17 life. So all to say that this version punishes your opponent for not making the correct sideboard for their equipment. And then of course you can still play out your Scalding Rain 1-for-4 patterns. I like Aether Spindle. We'll talk about that here in a moment. We're going to look at my list. I like Aether Spindle. I like Sonic Boom. This one runs the reds and the blues, probably because it just doesn't have the space for the yellows to play these cards instead, and it just waits. Also, this one has more defensive tools in Sink Below and Fate Foreseen versus the whatever it was called, and Fate Foreseen, the Absorbent Aether, and Fate Foreseen. So overall, this deck looks similar in some ways and different in others. I'm a big fan of just the 2 Whisper of the Oracles we'll talk about here in a moment. This one leverages more attacks. I also want to say, it can include Balance of Justice, and Balance of Justice, I actually looked at Alex's list and I was like, oh, he's playing Balance. I thought about doing that. Maybe I should try it. And Balance of Justice is now on my list for Brutes, so that's pretty awesome. But it can play that because sometimes it just doesn't need as many counters. So into certain matchups, you could be like, yeah, it's fine. I'm going to get extra defensive value, and then throw these attacks you're not going to expect. So this version is underplayed right now and perhaps should see more play going forward. But that's the second. It's the more attack action heavy version of Blaze. Doesn't have Scar for a Scar like some people tried early on in her life cycle, but let's talk about the full aggressive version that I have been playing to the tune of almost 400 games now. And again, forgive me, I've been talking about Blaze for like 6 hours now. I went to sleep at midnight after putting the finishing touches on the guide. By the way, the guide is over at METAFY. If you would like to support this channel and support me and also learn from me, from everything that I've figured out, all the knowledge, all the wins, all the losses that I've put into this deck to the tune of, 373 games, and a lot of them over the course of the past month or so. If you want to learn from all of that knowledge and understand this list that I'm about to explain better, I talk about matchup guides, I talk about when to go first versus when to go second, how to play into aggression, how to play into fatigue. I show gameplay and I review gameplay on my own games of what I've learned. If you want to see that, support me down in the link in the description. Go to METAFY, check it out. I put out a full-on course. It is about 3 hours long, and you can pick it up and you can learn everything you need to know about this deck, and then follow up with me, and I would be glad to help you talk you through it. Okay, this is the most aggressive version of Blaze I have put together up to this point that I feel comfortable running out there, and it has done quite well for me into a variety of matchups. And why is this so different? You look at this and you're like, there are no 1-for-4s. There are no 1-for-4s. You are correct. We are not playing this 1-for-4 on my turn, 1-for-4 on your turn game plan. There are no Rainbow Whisper of the Oracles. We don't even have the blue Cinderings in there. Why? Okay, well, this deck ends the game in 3.5 turns. That is the goal, to win or lose in 3.7 turns. In the wins, we win in 3.5 turns. In the losses, it goes 5 turns or so. We're like more than 4 turns. So if that's the case, if we're trying to win quickly, 1, how are we doing that? And 2, what have we done to the deck to facilitate that? Well, first things first, same equipment suite. The key card in this is, well, it's a twofold sort of thing. Emeritus Scolding encourages us to play on our opponent's turn by dealing extra damage in doing so. Okay, so we get to deal extra damage when we play this on our opponent's turn. So we are encouraged to do that. And the blue and the yellow are insane, so we're encouraged to play those when we draw them. If we find those, we are encouraged to play them at our opponent because they are above rate and they are usually over the top of their arcane barrier. Okay, that's thing 1. Thing number 2. Absorb an Aether is freaking insane. This card is not a 1-for-4. This card is a 1-for-6 because it's encouraging us to play on our opponent's turn. What happens when you pitch a blue and pay for Absorb an Aether with 2 floating? You get a 4 defensive value card that gives you 2 buff on your arcane spell. You can then spend those 2. If you have the counters, you can just do it without popping Stormstriders to play Emeritus Scolding, which is itself giving you a 2 arcane buff as well. So when we combine these 2, you are going from dealing 4 damage on your turn to dealing 8 damage on your opponent's turn. And that is off of a blue. So if we look at the efficiency of playing this 3-card 8 on our opponent's turn with arcane damage, that is far and away over what our opponent can deal with in general on their own turn. Because again, on their own turn, they're sending damage at us. So we are getting value by defending with Absorb an Aether and also dealing damage on the opponent's turn. And we can do this with every card. In fact, this is good with every card in the deck that deals arcane damage. And there's a lot of cards in the deck that deal arcane damage because that is a ratio I care greatly about. We also run the yellows because it is a 1-for-3 block, and you might think that's kind of terrible. But remember, this represents 5 total value because it's giving you 2+2 on the next arcane spell that you deal. So overall, you are dealing above rate arcane damage on their turn so fast that you just oftentimes win the game in a few turns. So it is through these cards and Emeritus Scolding that the deck is sort of formulated. The idea that we can pitch a blue and go above rate with these cards. The same thing is true of Sonic Boom. We can pitch a blue, go Absorb an Aether Sonic Boom. We can do that same thing with Aether Spindle, of which we run the reds and the blues. Oftentimes, when you play blue Aether Spindle after Absorb an Aether, you're sending it for a red Aether Spindle's worth of value, a 2-for-4, which is pretty amazing, and then you're opting. So our opt counters are generated off of these points. This is how we've changed the deck. We don't have a ton of opt, and we don't need a ton of opt because the game often ends before you build up these massive counters. Sometimes you win the game with 8 counters, and sometimes you win the game with 1 counter, but you're winning. Cindering Foresight yellows and reds are our opt that happen at instant speed. We play Eye of Ophidia for opting at instant speed. We play Whisper of the Oracle for opting on our own turn, usually often on turn 0 or turn 1 if we draw into it or kept it in our hand. And then, of course, Aether Spindle. Those are our opt abilities. And then, of course, we sit on Talismanic Lens almost all the time. From this point forward, everything, like when we start on turn 0 or turn 1, we slam down Talismanic Lens, activate it if we see fit, and have 2 counters. And from that point forward, we just throw damage. And a lot of these cards you look at, okay, every blue in the deck serves a function. These are damage dealing cards and they can be discarded to amped. These are damage dealing cards and they can be discarded to amp. Foreboding Bolt is a 1 damage dealing card that also allows you to opt with impunity. It doesn't have to deal damage. Aether Arc is insane. It's a really, really good card. It deals 1 damage, and it can give you a Ponder token. And then we get to Kindle. Kindle is a card that I think is only played in aggressive versions of Blaze. I talk about Kindle a good bit and why it's in the deck in the guide, but overall Kindle allows you to amp and go way insane while also drawing you a card to be able to activate Waning Moon, because we're not just incentivized to play back and forth on our opponent's turn and on our turn, but we're often incentivized to go like Emeritus Scolding on our turn after playing Cindering Foresight, Kindle to draw the card that we opted to the top. It's a blue. We play Waning Moon with that. That is like 7 damage thanks to Cindering plus Emeritus, and Waning Moon is 10 damage on our opponent's turn. That can be a turn 0 play. Like, I mean, this deck can go way fast, and I show that in the guide. I show a ton of gameplay. In fact, I'm probably going to do some gameplay either tonight or tomorrow on a stream. The final cards in this deck that you may not expect to see are not 1-for-4s. They are 0-for-3s, and people are going to scratch their heads at this, but just understand this. Look, if we are dumping 3 out of our 4 cards on our opponent's turn to deal 10 to 12 damage, really the range is like 9 to 13 sometimes damage, we aren't doing anything on our turn. But these 0-for-3s allow us to do something on our turn. We could present 10 damage on our opponent's turn, and then we can turn around with the final card in our hand being a 0-for-3 and throw 3 more damage and say, okay, well, you dealt with what was on your turn. Now, do you want to give me another card? And if they don't, they get you closer to you killing them because they take 3 damage. And if they do, they can't send an insane turn back at you because they've blocked for usually AB3. Right now, AB3 is the average into most decks. Most decks are running AB3. And these 4 cards are crazy. Also, because we're opting, you can set up a turn where you've dumped 4 cards from your hand to deal damage. You play Kindle, and then you draw one of these cards. So you essentially make your hand go from no way to play on your own turn after dealing damage to playing on your own turn. This card can be insane. Also, because it's 0, you can oftentimes have 1 resource left over from doing some crazy combo with Emeritus Scolding or Sonic Boom or whatever. So you can Storm Striders with that last resource and play a 0 cost, which means that you can go like Emeritus Scolding, Storm Striders, Overflow the Aether Well, Waning Moon. So I did talk at length about this deck. If you want to support me and if you want to validate all of the work that I put into explaining how Blaze functions, check out the guide because I really talk at length and in depth about this deck and how this aggressive version just pushes so much damage. This is the 3rd and final archetype, and this is one I would be most terrified of if I were sitting down and playing into the skirmish season. So these are all the ways you can play Blaze. If you want more info, of course, check the link in the description. And if you enjoy this type of video where I break down a hero fully and completely, make the number go to another number. I know it's a little bit of a longer video, but hey, hopefully you enjoyed it while you were cooking dinner. As always, thanks for watching.